A debate is raging in college football circles about conference strength. This normally is reserved for bowl season, but now everyone's talking about it because the SEC seems like it may have a flat tire or three. And that means that conference supremacy is up for grabs. It's like a ladder match, and all of a sudden everyone's reaching for the belt. I think this is an impossible debate, but so many of you have asked me, hey, who do you think is the number one conference in America right now? That I'm going to wade into these treacherous waters right along with the rest of you. I think it's impossible only because I'm not so sure we all value the same thing. A lot of you look at this and you say, well, how many teams out of your conference could make the playoff? How many of them could win a championship? A lot of the rest of you just care about rankings or conference records. So here's the first thing. Ultimately, in December, it's going to come down to who has the most title contenders. And the way I see it right now, and I'm free to adjust this, as are you in your own mind, I think the SEC's still got to be considered to have three of them. I think Georgia and Alabama are certainly up there. I think LSU is still up there. Because the thing about it is, you can't be knocking LSU out of contention, but also tell me Florida State's a bona fide title contender when that's the team they lost to. Ditto with Alabama. They lost to Texas. No one's knocking Texas. They're a title contender, and so on and so forth. In the Big Ten, clearly they've got three of them up there, or at least we think it's clear that as of now, Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State. So by that prism, SEC, Big Ten, kind of similar. Now, here's my question to you. How would you view the Pac-12 right now? Because I can make two arguments. I could make an argument there are like 5 teams out there that are alive for championship/playoff consideration. Or you could come back at me and say, no, they actually have one or none. You just haven't seen all the carnage start to take place once conference play starts. Which either one of them could be true. We're so early in the season, one of many reasons, by the way, that this is a totally irrelevant conversation. Naturally, I'm leading the show with it. Big 12 is the same way. Like Kansas State hasn't lost a game. Should I consider them a playoff contender? We're going to see them in 48 hours. Should I consider them a playoff contender? Because I consider Texas one, and I've seen Texas in person. I consider Oklahoma one. But if you shot back at me, well, you only think that because of what the Vegas odds say. Well, kinda, yeah. I mean, you are right about that. Oklahoma has not played a marquee opponent yet. And so the ACC, that's tough because right now, as much as I don't believe in writing Clemson off, I've temporarily taken my hand and I've just pushed them to the side, and I got Florida State alone in the playoff contention bracket for the ACC. But I could be wrong about that. Like I said, I reserve the right to add teams and subtract teams at my leisure. But here's the reason I don't take part in this conversation in bowl season. In bowl season, you know how back in the day before people used phrases like meaningless bowl game, casuality. Before people did that, though, we would have, what did ESPN call it? Capital One Bowl Mania or whatever it was, where you just compare conference records. The Pac-12 is 6-1 in bowl season. The SEC is 2-7 in bowl season. And, you know, that was the most low-hanging fruit imaginable, but it was used around the Christmas dinner table and the New Year's Eve, whatever in the world you gather around on January 31st or December 31st. It was used to tout conference supremacy. Well, I never looked at it that way. I thought the only way, and I still think this way, I think the only way that you could measure true, legitimate conference supremacy is if you had some tournament wherein every conference was seeded 1 through 12, 1 through 14, 1 through 16, however many of them you have. Find the number that would fit them all. So 14, I guess, every conference has at least 12, I think, or 14 right now. So take the top 14 teams out of every conference, seed them 1 through 14, and then if I'm going to watch an ACC versus Pac-12 game, I want to see number 4 versus number 4. So far this year, what's happened, and this is going to sound like sour grapes. Half of you already think I'm an SEC homer anyway, so I don't care at this point. That's fine. We all know where I grew up. That's fine. The SEC's 3-6 right now in out-of-conference matchups, which most people would tell you means the SEC is down, and I don't disagree that the SEC is down. What it doesn't tell me is how they measure up shot for shot against any other conference. Because what we saw, in case you hadn't been paying attention, is FSU, LSU. Okay, that was the ACC's number 1 against the SEC's, call it a 3. I think that's safe to say. North Carolina beat South Carolina. Okay, that was supposed to tell me something about ACC, SEC. What it told me is the number 3 team in the ACC beat the number 10 team in the SEC. As they should. I'm not downing the accomplishment. I'm just saying that tells me nothing about the conference against the conference. Florida, by most discernible metrics, was the 11th or 12th team preseason in the SEC. Utah, even without Cam Rising, who is in the production suite as we speak, even without Cam Rising, 5 maybe in the Pac-12. It doesn't tell me what you think it tells me. This is not the flex you think it is, to quote the famous meme of me that's floating around. I think the most powerful arguments against the SEC right now are that A&M Miami game and the Texas Bama game. Those mean something to me. At least it means something team versus team to me. Now, there may be a steep drop-off once you get to the middle tiers of those respective conferences versus the SEC, but the rest of this stuff is just matchup stuff. It just tells me North Carolina is better than South Carolina. It tells me, at least to start the season, FSU was better than LSU by a wide margin in the second half, as it turns out. Doesn't really tell me much about the ACC. So conference record, I don't care about head-to-head. I never care about it in bowl season. So I especially don't care about it in the regular season. And anyone who's watched me for a long time, thank you. I mean, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Anyone who's watched me for a long time knows that I've used this against the SEC for years. Even if the SEC were to tout this stuff, I would remind SEC fans. I would say, well, was it evenly seeded? No, it wasn't. So therefore, I don't care. I don't care if Alabama goes and beats Duke. I really don't. It didn't tell me anything. It tells me Alabama's better than Duke. Love to see that matchup at the moment, but I don't really care about anything past that. Rankings, I also don't care about. So right now, the AP is just littered with Pac-12 teams, which I got no problem with. The JP poll has how many, Jesse? We got 6 Pac-12 teams in our top 25. So, yeah, I agree with that in theory. Here's the difference. You want to know the difference between rankings and power ratings? Here's the difference. Follow me here on this little mental exercise. So the AP has UCLA at number 24 right now. I got no issue with that. I got UCLA a little bit higher, but I've got no issue with that. So for argument's sake, let's just say the AP is dead on the money. It's right about every team. It's not, obviously. But for argument's sake, let's say that is the gospel. All these words are written in red. Take it to the bank. If that were the case, that would mean UCLA has 7 Pac-12 teams ahead of them in the top 25. Southern Cal, Colorado, Oregon State, Utah's up there, Washington's up there. Washington State is ahead of UCLA. So all those teams are ranked ahead of UCLA, right? Let's say UCLA played every one of them in conference play, just as a mental exercise, and they lost to every one of them. Would you keep UCLA 24th? If they lost in direct proportion to how much higher ranked their opposing team is than them. So Southern Cal beats them by 2 touchdowns. Washington State beats them by 1 point. In other words, the AP poll plays out on the field exactly as it says it should. What would you do with UCLA? The JP poll wouldn't bump them down a single spot. I'd keep them number 24 because what I would see is validation that my power ratings are right. But in rankings land, you can't have a 5 and 7 team ranked inside the top 25. Absolutely not. No. So that's dumb to me. That's why I never believed in ranking teams, because the merit or the punishment just because you win or just because you lose has never made sense. This is not pro sports. This is college sports. And also, that's why I do power ratings. So the best I can tell right now, and I really hate to do this because I know a lot of folks are really, really dialed up and ready to bash the SEC like a piñata. The SEC is still the best conference in college football. That's one truth. The other truth is I do think it's down. I do think it's much closer to the Pac than in most years. But here's the separator. You hold them to a different standard in your mind. And most of you know you do. But even if you don't know that, in that subconscious of yours, you do. You hold the SEC to a different standard. You look at them and you criticize them for things you would totally shut your mouth about if you saw the ACC do it or the Big 12 do it, because you don't expect as much from them. But if we're doing an apples to apples heads up scenario right here, you can't do that. You got to hold everyone to the same standard. So right now, I'm just looking at my power ratings. You can think what you want to about them. I got 3 SEC teams in my top 10. I got 3 Big 10 teams in my top 10. But when I get to that second tier, there's a pretty sizable drop-off. I don't have a lot of Big 10 elsewhere in the top 25. I got some SEC. I got 6 Pac-12 teams, but my highest Pac-12 team is 7th. I got 4 from the Big 12. I got 4 from the ACC. And so as much as you want to knock the SEC's depth shouldn't be knocked. It's just that when that depth gets tested against the ACC's number 3 team or the Pac-12's number 4 team, yeah, it's going to get exposed a little bit because the SEC's not as good this year as they are in most years. But here's the thing. There was a wide swath. There was a big gap, a chasm, if you will, between where the SEC had been and wherever the next best conference was. And the only contender really was the Big 10 in years past. And look, it may still shake out that way this year. I love what the Pac-12's done. I think the Pac-12 could end up reasonably being the second best conference top to bottom in college football this year. They're not going to be better than the SEC. No one will be better than the SEC this year. No one will be better than the SEC for the foreseeable future. I know that's unpopular. It also happens to be truth. Even in a down year for the SEC, the quality in the conference top to bottom is better than the top to bottom quality in any other conference. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is.